All right, you guys. So today is Monday, October 13th, right? Everybody say hi. Hi. All right. So we are about to start our first lesson on basic genetic stuff. And what we're going to do is just review some basic stuff that maybe you should have learned in junior high. So what you're going to do is just jot down these notes on your notebook paper. The top of your notebook paper should say Basic Genetics Review, Punnett Squares. And you should also have a number 1 at the top. Do any of you remember the father of genetics? We talked about him a little bit before. A monk, definitely a monk. What was his name? He worked with pea plants. Mendel, right. His name was Gregor Mendel. So it's just a little bit of history here. And what he found was that it was interesting. He worked in the garden a lot, and he found it very interesting that some pea plants were really tall, some were short. Some had like yellow flowers, some had white flowers. Some had pea seeds that were wrinkled, and some had pea seeds that were smooth. So he started to question why that occurred and how that occurred. So he is considered the father of genetics. He was the kind of like the first person to do that. Do you guys know what carries that genetic information that determines your traits? What is passed on from one person to another person to make new? Genes, right. And these genes are located where? Where do we find them? They're definitely in the nucleus, but what are they on in the nucleus? Deanna? On the what? No. What's inside the sex cells? Juan? Chromosomes, right? Those X things that we learned about last time. So these genes are actually located on chromosomes. Okay. I'll go back. So if you remember chromosomes, they look like this, right? And this middle part, do you guys remember what that middle part is called? It's a protein disc. It holds it together. Centromere, very good. And then these little things coming off of it are the chromatid, right? And the chromatid have the genes on them. And these genes, you get one from mom and you get one from dad. So if this was the mom chromosome, this red one, a green one next to it is now from the father, right? And these are called homologous chromosomes, just to review that. So these two together are called homologous chromosomes. And these homologous chromosomes have genes on them at the same locus. Locus is the location. So if we were to like bubble in a section here on this chromatid and bubble in a section here on this chromatid, that's basically the same locus or location of that gene. So this gene could be for hair texture. I'll just put hair text. And this gene is for hair texture. Okay? And we're going to learn in this new little unit of study, like what makes one dominant over the other, because one of these will be dominant or over the other. But we're also going to learn that there's other situations where there's co-dominance and things like that. So in this unit, we're going to be looking at that whole dominant recessive thing and then all these other exceptions, which are referenced as non-Mendelian genetics. Okay? So does everybody have all that? Good? So when we get these genes from our parents, we get varied genes from our parents. And these varied genes are called alleles. I like to reference alleles as like the letter from the parent. You know, like big T or little t. So a way to reduce this is just a varied version of the same gene is called an allele. So you might get one allele from your father that is dominant, right? And then the one from your mom is recessive. Which one is the one that shows? Do you guys know? Yes. The dominant one. The dominant one shows. So we actually see the phenotype of that, the physical traits of that. The recessive one is masked, right? It's covered up. It's definitely a carrier of that recessive gene, but it's not going to be showing it. Okay. The genes of an organism for one specific trait are those alleles, which are referenced as the genotype or the letter combination. So let me erase this so that you guys can see that. The genes of the organism for a trait, just what I've underlined is all you need to write down, are the genotype. The genotype is the letter combination. The letter combination. And again, this word letter, that means alleles. Okay? So it's what you're getting from your mom and what you're getting from your dad regarding the gene trait. The physical appearance of a trait, we've used this before, is the phenotype. So the physical appearance, that could be like tall, short, wrinkled, smooth, right? Curly, wavy. That's the phenotype. The phenotype is the physical appearance. So if you look at this, I've highlighted red in genes, red in genotype. P in physical, P in phenotype, to keep those together. So this is what you see. Are there any questions so far? No? Okay. So we have a lot of new vocabulary here in this unit. So it's really important to keep track of all of that. In the handout that I gave last Friday, we did that. Juan, you were absent. Here's this. So we worked on that on Friday. All right. So a genetic feature that hides the recessive is called dominant. Traits that seem to disappear when two different genes for the same trait are present is called recessive. You don't have to write this all down word for word. We actually have already defined these a little bit. So dominant is one, a feature that hides recessive, that's dominant, right? The trait that seems to disappear, so a trait that disappears when two different genes for the same trait are present, is recessive. What is the only way recessive can be shown? Do you guys know, Deanna? If all the genes are recessive, right. So for recessive, for it to show, the only way it can show is if both letters or alleles are recessive. Okay? So again, you don't have to write all this down word for word. Write down what I've underlined and what I've written. Two alleles that are same for a trait is called homozygous, and two alleles that are different for a trait is called heterozygous. Okay? So two alleles. What's another word for alleles that I keep on saying? Letters, right? Two letters that are the same is homozygous. Can everybody say homozygous? Homozygous. Two alleles or letters that are different, right? There's uppercase, lowercase. That means heterozygous. So what would be an example of a homozygous? There's two different ways to do it. Yes. Very good. So big T, big T. What would be another possibility? Yes. Little t, little t. Very good. And then the ones that are different, an example would be what? Big T, little t. Right. So you've got one upper, one lower. That's what they call different. Okay. All right. What I'm going to do now, I need to stop this lecture. So escape. And oh, I didn't want to